Hey everyone, I'm Zain Baig, this is Auto Group, and today we are going to talk about racing. Particularly, I'm going to give most tips, most of them regarding go-karting specifically, because that's what I do quite a bit of league racing, as well as general car racing as well, because a lot of those things transfer over to car racing. And I also do quite a bit of virtual racing as well when I'm not doing go-karting. But this is something that I don't really ever share on our channel, as we mostly do reviews of normal cars, of course. But for starters, I was thinking of not making it too much of a basic video, because there are quite, I think, a lot of videos probably on YouTube that are talking about the basics of at least go-karting maybe. For example, things that teach you about the racing line, for example, and braking and other simple tips and how to practice and get better. But I was thinking a bit more of tips that I could share are probably stuff that I maybe learned over my own practice with racing and watching racing as well, versus just the basics. So, for starters, one of the first things that I wanted to talk about, I guess we could talk about maybe three or four different things. I haven't really planned out specifically what we're going to talk about, but um, for the first thing that I was thinking of was the concept of momentum and how to keep your momentum high throughout the entire race and throughout your normal lap, just even one single lap. And this is especially important in go-karts, because go-karts don't have a lot of power and not a lot of grip. They are very light, so it does seem like you're driving something quite sharp and agile and that can handle corners at high speeds, but that's just, quite a lot of the basic physics, because the thing is so light and so free to move around, and very, very small as well. The issue with go-karts is a lot of times, especially in rental carts, in rental leagues and stuff, where you're just renting the cart there. Those things, they don't have a lot of power, and they may have the plastic cladding around them and the roll hoop, and I guess they're a bit, heavier than your normal lightweight racing cart. One of the first things that you want to figure out with the car is where its happy place is during the lap. And what I mean by that is that it's the point where you have the most grip pretty much at all times throughout the lap, because racing in general is basically a competition of who has the most grip, or who can, produce the most grip based on their movements with the car, to put it very simply. So, for example, what I mean by this is, once, of course, you learn the basic, your track and the cart that you're driving, or car, and you want to figure out the racing line, the fastest way around the track, which is generally the same for all the drivers. It's not like one driver is driving in a completely different line and beating everybody else. Pretty much every single driver takes the same route around the track, generally. Momentum. This is basically what I think of it as being, is the most fluid way through the entire track, in a way that you're connecting all the different dots. It's like a big connect the dots type of game. And that's regarding the different dots are braking, accelerating, steering, and just a bunch of all the things in between there, which is, the gap between getting off the gas and getting on the brake, and everything in between like that. This is where practice comes in a bunch. Once you set your braking markers around the track, and you're getting faster and faster, you're noticing what you're doing is really good. You want to get to the point where there's not a single bit of gap in the middle of any of your movements. What I mean by that is, when you get into the braking phase of the corner, when you're coming up to a corner, and you hit the brakes, you want to hit them in a way that you basically achieve the maximum braking force in the shortest amount of time. What ends up happening sometimes is that when you're going for hard braking for a certain corner, you may be on the brakes for too long, and you get too slow, and you lose momentum. So you want to get on the brakes in a way that you just achieve the right amount of braking. Some people say that you should brake at the maximum braking force before your wheels start to lock or lose grip, and then let off, and then go into your cornering phase. But that, to me, isn't always the case. Sometimes for certain corners, you don't have to hit the brake fully, of course, right? So, for example, some corners may only require 60% braking force, and the rest is just steering input. So it's not like you can always follow that concept of fully hard braking, and then getting off. So the first thing, obviously, when you approach a corner, like I just said, is your braking phase. Now, this braking phase, once you set your braking markers, becomes easier and easier, and it becomes just a habit. Whereas the first time, you may be a bit nervous as to where you want to brake, and you might brake too early, or if you're trying to get faster and faster, you might brake too late. Although it may seem when you're entering the corner that braking late is the way to go, but it's not the way to go all the time. You want to brake at that set marker where you just brake enough to the point where everything is nice and free with the car and the momentum is still high. As soon as you're coming up to the corner too early, you're going to notice that, oh, well, now that I arrived this early, I'm going to have to compensate by going faster through the rest of the corner to make up the lap time. And then the same thing is for when you outbrake yourself, then even if your entry is really fast, you're going to have to fix that with a bunch more steering input, and you're going to be slower out of the corner. So, and you might have heard that term slow in, fast out. We could talk about that as well, but the thing about slow in, fast out is that it sounds, to me a bit slow because of the first part. I would rather say quick in, quicker out, or fast in, faster out. Something that makes you, focus on the fast aspect of it. So, like I said, with the once you find your braking markers, that could be a pole over there, that could be one of the braking markers, like the meter boards, the 100-meter board, the 50-meter board, stuff like that. Or it could be, generally you don't want to really pick shadows because that could change, during your race. You want to choose certain elements that are just there, and that's where you want to hit the brakes. After you're braking, because this is where you make a huge amount of time, you'll notice after a bit of practice probably that when you come up to a little too late to the corner, just very slight, you may notice that you're struggling turning in the car, and although it may feel fast, you're probably not being that fast. In order to keep the momentum high through the corner, when you steer after your braking phase, it's probably a very, very smooth motion that you're going to feel, and not much tire squealing or anything. You don't feel like you're punishing the tires. You feel like you're working with the tires and working with the rest of the go-kart or your car. So that is the second part, which is your steering or cornering, and this is where, again, your flow through the corner is going to be quite, interesting for a lot of different corners in go-karting because there are a lot of high-speed corners. And the thing is, if you go into this cornering phase way too fast, you're probably going to do what's called bogging the cart because you're going to get to understeer. And when you get to understeer, because of your too much entry speed, and when you're compensating, the front wheels are going to scrub more and more, and you're going to keep going straight, and you're going to keep compensating, and then you're probably going to have to get off the gas, or else you're just going to go probably straight up the track. And this is all, of course, very, very slow. You don't want to be doing any of these things when you're trying to set a fast time or win the race, of course. So when you're coming into the corner, instead of, always coming in full beans and then flicking the wheel, generally speaking, in order to keep the cart happy in its happy place, as I call it, generally speaking, you could just feel that out after practice more and more and more, that the cart is now just gradually flowing through the corner in a fast, smooth way. So smoothness and just calmness during this time and precision is really, really quite important. The other thing is that when you're turning into the corner, you'll notice the optimal steering angle, generally speaking, throughout the corner is when the car is turning at a very nice ratio to where the wheel is positioned. What I mean by that is that, for example, if you come into the corner and you're feeling like you're going really fast, but your wheel is like this, and you're still going kind of straight, and you're kind of just wrestling the car through the corner, you're probably not going that fast. Same thing is when you really keep such a slight steering angle that you're just not going towards the corner, you're going wider and wider unnecessarily, that is also slow. You want to find that balance where you're just at the right steering angle and the car is flowing through the corner, or the cart is flowing through the corner. What ends up happening oftentimes is, because these go-karts generally are single-speed go-karts, so they have a certain rev range where they're really, really powerful, or torquey, I should say. They don't have a lot of power, but when you fall out of that because of your slow understeer or some other thing that you upset the cart with, then you're just going to have to wait until it makes the power up. So that's what bogging is. For the final thing of the corners, basically the three phases of taking a turn, your acceleration phase. This is where, generally speaking, go-karts are quite easy. Certain cars are probably really hard, that have a lot of power and not a lot of grip. This is where it's something that you can feel out after time, and you just want to accelerate at the point where you can take the car out wide through the corner. You shouldn't accelerate too hard in the middle of the corner where you can upset the car with oversteer, or you can really, make the car understeer off the track. You want to do it at a point where you just have just the right amount of room where you can accelerate freely and kick the car out wide and use every bit as much as you want of the track to gain those extra bits of lap time. Other tips that I have after this subject of momentum, braking, mid corner, and acceleration, all that stuff. The other things I was thinking of is the mental aspect of the sport and how to cope with different elements throughout your race, for example, or qualifying. Qualifying, I feel like, is oftentimes a bit less pressure, in my opinion, because generally speaking, you have a few different opportunities to fix your lap. It's not like you're always doing one lap. But the thing about the race, to me, is that where I race at like K1 speed, for example, in a league race, or whether it's virtual racing, oftentimes these races are very short, and you have to do you want to do quite a lot in this race in order to succeed. You want to make sure you get your do's and don'ts taken care of during the race. If you're catching the car ahead of you, you want to do it in a way that's very, very smooth and elegant, I should say, in a way that's very, very fast and precise, without doing some overly aggressive thing, because oftentimes you feel like you're doing an amazing job when you're going really, really hard, but you can easily make a simple mistake that will undo that work, and maybe you'll fall back places instead of even staying in the same place. When you're defending, what oftentimes happens is that the person puts so much pressure on you from different techniques, like dummy overtakes, where they fake an overtake to scare you off the road, or to scare you to defend, and then they work their way around you. Stuff like that happens when you're under pressure from behind. You could simply calm yourself and do a very, very fantastic qualifying lap and repeat that process. And of course, that's easier said than done. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes when you're under pressure from the car behind, you may think that you have to do something extra to get faster and faster and keep them behind, whereas all you really have to do is just do what you've been doing in a smoother and slightly quicker way, and just set the pace up a bit more. So think of it as a qualifying lap. And this is tough on tracks that have a lot of straights, because the person behind you can draft and then pass you, because he'll be in your air pocket and then pass you probably. Track position is quite important, even on tracks where you may think that, oh, you could get them back later and you shouldn't fight this one. You should probably try really, really hard to stay in front of them. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it's quite obvious, but it sometimes seems like the fight isn't worth it because you guys could crash, of course, but it is quite important to keep track position, especially when it's a short race as well, like I do it at K1 or virtual racing. So these are different important techniques. So next topic is understeer and oversteer. Because we should probably go into a bit more detail. I feel like everybody generally knows what oversteer and understeer is in a car, but in order to cope with them and deal with them and counter them in a very efficient way is quite important in a race. Let's talk about oversteer, which is kind of the main one that I think pretty much everybody knows about, and that's when the rear end has less grip than the front end, and you put the car into a slide. And some people have a preference of driving oversteery cars, like I said, because they kind of rotate themselves really, really nicely, I guess, through the corner, mid-corner as well, because you can enter so fast into the corner. You have so much steering ability. And then the rest of the corner, you could kind of dance with the car, I guess, a bit, and then take it out of the corner. Understeer, on the other hand, is when the rear is stronger and the front end starts to slide, because when you're steering, and you're still going straight, or slightly straight even at times, you might hear a screech or a squeal from the tires. You're losing grip at the front and you're losing speed. Both these aspects of cars, of car racing, and what happens in oversteer and understeer, both of these things are technically slow because you're losing grip, but oversteer is slightly faster, I think, because of the way that you could balance the car by correcting the steering angle and taking it out of the corner. Understeer is my preference because although you come up to the corner a bit slower and you're fighting the car, trying to tug it into the corner, you're quite confident on the exit because you have so much rear stability compared to the front, which is weak. So they're total opposites, of course, in that regard, understeer and oversteer. And it depends on which is your style, of course, for the car, but the actual act of understeer and oversteer, that is something that takes a bit of practice to really understand. But it is also something that is quite natural, I think, to pretty much every racing driver. because as soon as oversteer starts to happen in a car or a cart especially, it's quite natural that you automatically correct it in a very smooth and quick way to where you're not losing your lap time. The thing about understeer is that some people maybe who don't have a lot of experience with cars or car racing may, when as soon as they get into an understeer situation, they may turn the steering wheel more, which is not good. I think it's quite, negatively going to affect your situation. And then the other thing is that if you just get off the gas, that could also, of course, help. You could hit the brakes just a bit in certain situations, but the main thing you want to do to regain that grip, one of the main things is that you want to just unwind the wheel and try to straighten the car, the angle of the wheels, so you could get that side grip back, then go for the turn again. You really want to quickly correct these things, both oversteer and understeer, so you don't lose lap time. So that's pretty much it that we could cover today. I think we covered quite a bit. We covered momentum, we covered braking, the mid-corner, the corner exit, understeer and oversteer, and also coping with the mental to-do list that you have during the race. So that is pretty much it for this episode of Auto Group that I wanted to make for all the racers out there or beginner racers as well. Let me know if you want more racing types of videos on the channel. Thank you so much for the support on the channel as well. And that's it, guys. We'll see you guys in the next one, God willing. Thank you.